Text functions other. Using the word other not to infer that these are not important, some of them are. We're going to begin with the text and value functions that allow you to convert a value to a text and a text to a value, the concatenate function, which allows you to string together text strings, the fix function, which allows you to display a value in a text string as a text, and the dollar function is similar, only it formats the value as a text string using the dollar formatting. The find and search functions allow you to search for and find text strings that are part of or encapsulated within a larger text string. The replace and substitute functions allow you to find those text strings in a larger text string and replace them or substitute them with a different text string. The rept or repeat function allows you to repeat a character a designated number of times. The exact function compares two text strings and returns a result of true or false if those text strings are exactly the same. And the code and character functions allow you to convert alphanumeric characters to the ASCII code and vice versa to troubleshoot some issues that you may have using the trim function, which was covered in a prior movie. We're going to begin by talking about the text and value functions. Sometimes there's some confusion about the distinction between the contents of the cell and the formatting of the cell. In column C, I have values, and in column F, I have text. If I want to convert the values, which sum to 909 currently, to text, this is not the way to do it. By selecting the cells and reformatting those cells as text. Even though the content in the cell is now left justified, which is the default justification for text, the alphanumeric characters in these cells is still values. I still get a sum of 909. If, however, you format the cells before you enter any content as text, and I'm going to copy my sum formula over here, when I enter content, it goes in the cells as text. My sum formula is not giving me any total because those alphanumeric characters are text and not numbers anymore, not values. And I don't tell you that to be confusing. It's just that if you already have values in your cells, the way to convert them to text is to use the text function. In order to really convert the contents of the cell to a text, you have to use the text function. Tab, my value is going to be in cell C14, comma, and then I have to define a format for the text. And I'm going to format this as currency by putting a $sign and 2 decimal places and enter. My formula doesn't recalculate, and you may run into this from time to time. The reason why Excel is not calculating this function, this formula, is because the cell is formatted as text. So anything we put into that cell, Excel thinks it's text, not a value and not a function or a formula, and it's displaying it as such. I'm going to delete my formula and reformat these cells as a number and go back and enter my formula again. Equal text, C14, comma, input my format, and enter. And then I'm going to left click and drag down to copy that formula and copy my sum function over, where I still obviously won't get a total because all the cells in that range contain alphanumeric characters that are text. The same content formatting thing applies to text. When you begin with text, you can't convert these alphanumeric characters that are text to a value by changing the formatting because nothing happens. You can convert these alphanumeric characters to values in one of two ways. One way is to use the value function. I'm going to input value. The argument that I'm going to define is cell F14, enter. I'm going to left click and drag down and then copy my sum function over, and I get the same total as I have in column C. The second way to convert these is to first make sure that your background error checking is turned on. Mine is not, so we're going to go turn it on. by going backstage to Alt-F-T, the Excel Options dialog box, go to Formulas, and enable background error checking. Left-click OK, and Excel flags all of those cells that contain alphanumeric characters because it's thinking, do you really want this to be a text or a number, a value? I can select that range and I get a smart tag that I can click on, and I can convert all these alphanumeric text strings to a number. The concatenate function. The concatenate function allows you to string together or piece together text strings, in fact up to 255 text strings, into one larger text string. This can be useful when you're trying to develop some narratives on your reports and your spreadsheets. I'm going to set up a concatenate function, tabbing to get that into the cell, with a couple of text strings, beginning with a sentence, closing the quote, comma for my next text string, selecting that value that's in column G, comma, I'm going to put a period because it's a sentence, closing the parentheses and enter, so I can concatenate text strings that either has some literal text strings as part of the arguments that make up the concatenate function, or references to cells that then become a part of your larger text string. Sometimes people will use a concatenate function to concatenate together keys that then are used for things like VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs. The problem with that is the following. In columns J and K, I have two records, and if I were to concatenate these records, tab, by selecting J10 as my first argument and K10 as my second argument, and enter, I will get the exact same result in cell B11 with the second record, even though they're obviously two different records. But when I set up an equation where cell L11 equals L10, enter, Excel tells me that's true. So the concatenate function is fine. I actually never use it because you can accomplish the same thing using an ampersand. So I'm going to use the ampersand to build the key, ampersand, and separate those two field values with a blank character space, enter, and then copy it down, and I am able to maintain the distinction that those are two different records. Then you could obviously do the same thing with the concatenate function. Selecting the first field value, adding a blank character space, and then the second field value, closing the parentheses, Control Enter, and then copying it down, I get the same result. So it's just really a matter of personal preference as to whether you use the concatenate function or you use the ampersand. The bigger point is that if you use the concatenate function and you're stringing together values that are supposed to represent unique keys for records, it's a good idea to insert a blank character space. Otherwise, you can get some inaccurate results. So the fixed and the dollar functions. Both of these functions are useful for pulling values into a text string that contains text, like we just did. It doesn't give you as much control over the formatting as using the text function that we saw just a minute ago, but it does allow you to format the value in your text string in one of two standard ways. So how would this work? I'm going to build a sentence using an ampersand by beginning with the value that's in cell D18, the sales for the year were, and I'm going to add to that with an ampersand the value by using the fixed function, tab, and the number that I want to use is in cell D12, and I have two optional arguments. They're in brackets, that makes them optional. I can define the number of decimals, and I can define whether I want commas or not. I'm going to select false, do not prevent commas, close the parentheses, and enter, and I was able to pull that value into my sentence and get it formatted fairly easily. The same thing is true in a slightly different way using the dollar function. Ampersand, pulling in the dollar function, referencing my cell that contains the value, and I have one optional argument that's the number of decimal places. I'm going to make it 2, close the parentheses, and enter. So because many times you're pulling out values out of your spreadsheets in the narratives that you're building in this way that will either be numbers or currency, these two functions provide an easy way to format those values when you pull them into your text string. So now we're going to talk about the find and the search functions, which are similar. The find function is case sensitive, the search function is not. And I've got a phrase, George of the Jungle, that's in cell C15 and C18, and then from column J to column AC, I've numbered the position of each one of those characters in that phrase. So we're going to begin with the find function, equal FIND, pull it into the cell by tab. And since we're looking for a text, it's going to be within quotes. This is case sensitive, so I'm going to look for a capital G, comma, within the text string in C15. And the optional argument, start number, I'm going to ignore for a second. Close the parentheses, Control Enter, and the G is in the first position, the capital G. Making a lowercase g, Control Enter, we find that it's in the 5th position. And we can even have the find function look for blank characters, which the first occurrence of that is in the 7th position. The search function works exactly the same way, only it's not case sensitive. So if I'm going to look for a capital G within the text string that's in cell C18, and again ignoring the optional argument, Control Enter, the capital G is in the 1st position, but since search is not case sensitive, it's going to tell me that the lowercase g is also in the 1st position. So what does this start number mean? Because this can be a bit confusing. I'm going to go back to the find function and input a start position of 8, which is right after the first occurrence of the blank space. And when I enter, I get a result of 10. So what happened? The find function began at position 8 and found the first occurrence of a blank character space that's in position 10 and gave me 10 as the result. So the start number, 8, just tells the find function and the search function, for that matter, where to initiate the search. Once it finds a match of the characters that it's looking for, it'll tell me the positioning of that character within the entire text string. There's another difference between the find and the search function other than case sensitivity, and that is that the search function will actually look for a text string containing more than one character. So if I'm looking for GE blank, enter, that text string is contained within the larger text string beginning at position 5. And once again, I have the option to pick a start position, which if I pick any start position beyond position 5, like 6, I get an error because the search was initiated beyond the point where that text string existed within the larger text string. The next two functions, the replace and the substitute, have quite a few number of arguments and it can get a little confusing. But what these functions do is the replace function looks for a text string based on the location in the larger text string and replaces that text string with something else. The substitute function looks for some text within the larger text string regardless of its location and then replaces that with something else. So I've got my phrase again, George of the Jungle, and I'm going to put in a replace function in G14, REPL, tab, the old text string, which is going to become the old text string once I define what a new one's going to be, comma, I'm going to start, let's say, in the 3rd position with the O, and I'm going to replace 4 characters with my new text, and I can replace this with as many characters as I want to. It could be 1, 3, 9. And to make the point, I'm going to just insert new text. Close the parentheses, enter, and we see, looking at the formula bar, that we began at the 3rd position, which is O in George, and took out ORGE, those 4 characters, and replaced that with the new text, which is new text. So that's the replace function that allows us to replace text based on the location of that text in the larger text string. The substitute function has us first select the text, comma, and then define the old text, or the text that we want to replace, and let's pick the letter E, because that shows up quite often, with the new text, and again, I'm going to input new text, and the optional argument, the instance number, which we can define or not, and I'll pick the instance number 3, close the parentheses, Control Enter, and the substitute function replaced the third occurrence of the letter E. There's 2 E's in George, and then the third E in the text string is in the word the, which is in the 13th position. It then took that out and replaced the E with our new text. So the substitute function will replace text regardless of its position in the text string. But it does allow you to select which occurrence of that text in the larger text string to replace. The next text function is the repeat function, R-E-P-T. There's probably a few things you can do with this, but one of the things you can do is use it for a graphic illustration of a series of numbers. Equal R-E-P-T, tab. The text that I'm going to repeat is the capital letter I. The other argument is the number of times that you want it repeated. And I'm going to refer to cells in column D to satisfy that argument. Close parentheses, Control Enter. And the output is the capital letter L repeated 129 times, or however many times the value in column D will cause it to repeat. So very quickly we can see that June was the highest month and November was the lowest month. So you can use the repeat function to provide yourself with an alternate way to visually display values. The exact function is a function that compares 2 text strings to see if they're exactly the same. If they are, exact returns true. If they're not, exact returns false. And this sort of harkens back to the same data elements that we used when we were talking about concatenate, and how 2 different text strings can be assembled to actually end up being the exact same text string. So I'm going to put an exact function in cell E15, tab, identify the contents in cell E12 as my first text string, comma, and E13 is my second text string, close the parentheses, Control Enter, and those 2 text strings are exactly the same, even though they began as something different, and I concatenated the 2 text strings together. And the exact function does test for case, so if I change the capital B to a lowercase b, these 2 text strings are now no longer exactly the same. This can be useful to troubleshoot NAs, not applicable, that you can get when you're using VLOOKUPs. Except in the case of VLOOKUPs, they are not case sensitive. So you might want to do this instead. Equal this cell equal this cell. And what I'm asking this formula to tell me is whether those 2 text strings are the same, Control Enter, and I get a true. So the exact function is case sensitive, but if you're building text strings and you're comparing text strings and you're utilizing functions that do not care about the case, you can instead do what I just did to test to see if the 2 text strings are equal without regard to case. The last 2 functions we're going to cover are the code function and the character function, CHAR. The code function converts a character to the ASCII code number, of which there's 255 that represent the characters. And once you have that number, the character function will convert that number back into the character. That probably sounds a lot more complicated than it is. I'm going to go to cell E12 and put in the code function, CODE, tab, referencing the letter A, enter. A is 65, copy, B is 66, C is 67, and I've got some blank characters in cells D, 16, and 17 that are not the same. These blank characters are 32, and these blank characters are 160. And we'll get to that in a second here, but like I said, once you have the character number, you can use the character function to convert that number back into the symbol or the letter. So why do we care about all this? Well, generally you probably don't. But you may run into issues when you're using the trim function where the trim function will not strip out the blank characters that have a code of 160. It'll only strip out the blank characters that have a code of 32. So I'm going to use the trim function and reference cell D20 and then copy that down. And you can visually see that the trim function did not strip out the blank characters that are separating A and B. And it didn't do it here because I've used the ampersand to concatenate A and B and separated them by the 3 blank character spaces that are in cell D17. And those blank character spaces have an ASCII code of 160. In this cell, I separated A and B by the blank character spaces that have an ASCII code of 32, which the trim function will strip out. So how do we fix that? I'm going to Control-C copy and paste several copies of the A and B separated by the blank character spaces with an ASCII code of 160. Wish there was a quicker way or shorter way to say that. I'm going to escape out of that, and I want character 160 that I want to replace with character 32. So I'm going to put a fill color in so I can keep track of my cells. And this is character code 160, this is 32. So what do I want to do? I want to use find and replace to replace all the blank character codes that have a code of 160 with those that have a code of 32. So I'm going to select the cell that has a blank character space with a code of 160, Control-C, copy, Control-H to pull up the find and replace dialog box, Control-V to copy the find what, which is the blank character space with the code of 160, go down and replace it with hitting the space bar. I know by doing that I'm generating a blank character space with a code of 32, and I can then select replace all. Excel has made 30 replacements. I'm going to acknowledge that and close that. And now the 2 results for the trim function are exactly the same. The other thing that the character function is good for is to insert characters into your worksheet that you couldn't otherwise insert. And this was actually covered in another movie, but it is character code related, so we're going to touch on it here. To do that, you go to the Insert tab, go to the Symbols group, left-click Symbols, and from the ASCII decimal group, you can select Special Characters and get the character code. In this case, it's 64. And there's a whole bunch of different characters you can get here. I'm going to cancel out of that. Now that I have the character code, I know using the character function, with that code, I can have the character function return that character. So this is a way to input or introduce special characters like the @ character, the copyright character, registered trademark character, and so on. So those are the rest of the text functions. We began looking at the text and the value function where we can actually convert the content of a cell to text from value and from value to text. We looked at the concatenate function, which allows you to build a larger text string from smaller text strings. We looked at the fixed and dollar function, which allows you to pull values into a text string, a sentence, and have those values be automatically formatted using the comma separator and the dollar sign. We looked at find and search that allow you to find text strings that are embedded within larger text strings. We looked at replace and substitute, which allows you to find text strings that are within larger text strings and replace them with other text strings. We looked at the repeat function, which allows you to graphically display values, the exact function, which will compare 2 text strings and tell you whether they're exactly the same or not, and the code and the character function, which allows you to convert symbols to the ASCII code number, or you can take an ASCII character code number and convert it back to the character.